Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Yesterday we saw how Magnus Carlsen lost in the first round of Norway chess to Fabiano Caruana with the black pieces, and today he was paired against the ultra solid Wesley So. So the big question on everyone's mind was, how is Magnus going to recover from yesterday's loss? So let's have a look. So Magnus opened the game up with the move e4, and Wesley, super solid as he is, played the move e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5, the Ruy Lopez, and Wesley sticks to, by the way, we will get to that game in a second. Magnus played e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, and the move bishop b5, the Ruy Lopez. And Wesley sticks to his guns with the move knight f6, the Berlin defense. Now there's many things white can do against the Berlin. The main move here is the move castles, then black takes the pawn at d4, and then after d4 you can go into this endgame, after knight f5, takes, where white has a 4 versus 3 majority on the king side. Black's king is a little bit exposed, but black has the bishop pair, which counts for a lot. But Magnus goes for a completely different approach. He plays the move d3, keeping all the pieces on the board. Now Wesley goes bishop c5, developing his bishop, and here Magnus trades his bishop for the knight on c6, and we get this very interesting imbalance, where white has perhaps a slightly better pawn structure, but again, black has the two bishops, but black has this light squared bishop, but it's very difficult to really make use of this light squared bishop, because white has so many pawns on the light squares, really limiting that bishop's scope. Now white castles here, and Wesley plays the move knight to d7, and Magnus plays the move pawn to h3. Now what Wesley could consider to do here is play something like f6, followed by knight f8 to e6 or knight g6, but Wesley just decides to castle. Magnus plays knight c3, and here the move a5 by Wesley. A pretty interesting move. He's just gaining space on the queen side, and Magnus is like, well, I don't want Wesley gaining a whole lot of space over here. Let me go pawn to a4, grab a bit of space myself. Now Wesley plays f6, defending his pawn on e5 a little bit more, and Magnus plays the move queen to e2. And his idea after rook e8 is to play bishop to e3, offer the trade of bishops. Wesley is like, well, I want to keep my bishop pair on the board, so he plays the move bishop to d6. And here, the position is pretty close, so what Magnus could try to do is get in the f4 push. So he could play something like knight h4, the knight could jump to f5 as well, but also the move f4 is there. Then Magnus plays the move knight e2. Wesley plays knight f6, very logical, he wants to go knight e6 or knight g6. And here I was a little bit surprised. I would expect Magnus to play a move like f4, getting that pawn break in. I mean, black should be doing alright here after takes everything in knight e6, but at least white changes the dynamic of the position a little bit. But Magnus decides to play it very slowly and plays the move f3. Now Wesley gets his knight at g6, covering the f4 break, and he's also still keeping the e6 square open for his bishop. Now Magnus plays the move queen to f2, bishop e6, and knight e2, reinforcing the f4 break. Wesley plays queen to d7. Now the f4 break is not that easy to achieve, because if you go f4, black can take, and after you trade everything, there will be queen d4 check at the very end with a double attack on the king and the pawn on b2. So that is why Magnus plays the move b3, to make sure that this pawn is no longer hanging after this check over here. Now Wesley plays the move bishop to b4. Magnus can probably still play f4 anyway, but he decides to play the move rook a1, and I think this might turn out to be a mistake later on. We will see why. Now Wesley played b6, g4 by Magnus, and here an excellent move by Wesley. He plays the move b5. Now with the move b5, he wants to take over here and play c5, put pressure on the pawn. And if white takes himself, well, then black can recapture and they can create a passer on the a file. So perhaps that's why Magnus should have kept his rook on a1, so he could always recapture. But after b5, he plays the move h4, gaining space on the queen side. And now Wesley trades on a4 and plays the move bishop to d6, further restricting that f4 break. And he wants to play the move c5, but he doesn't want to shut out his bishop, because now the bishop is a little bit passive. Also, white can pressure it with the move c3. So that is why he plays bishop d6. Magnus plays queen to h2. He wants to play the move h5, but if he goes h5 right away, Wesley could jump in with the move knight f4. So that is why he goes here. But the funny thing is, after c5, h5, Wesley decided to play knight f4 anyway. And you can take, but at the end of it all, Wesley takes this pawn over here. And black should be doing pretty alright. I mean, he's got this passed a pawn that he can start pushing down the board once his queen moves back. So Magnus decides, okay, well, let me go ahead and defend upon an a4 with the move rook to a1. But now Wesley trades and goes rook e to b8. And again, all of a sudden this pawn is pretty weak. Magnus goes c4, rook b4, and honestly there's no good way to defend it. So Magnus just decides to sacrifice it with the move knight to b1. Wesley takes, takes, knight to c3, queen c6, or rook a1. Black's up a pretty solid pawn. It's not easy to make progress at all because, I mean, he has this pawn, but how can he really make progress? There's no good pawn breaks on the king side because that's always going to open up the black king. So Wesley plays a4, queen to c2, bishop d7, rook a2. And here, slightly surprising, after the move king to f7, he just offered a draw. But to be fair, I think it's really difficult to make progress with black. That being said, imagine Magnus was playing this game with the black pieces. It's hard to imagine him offering a draw. But anyway, in Norway chess, this doesn't mean that this is the end of the game. The players, when they make a draw, have to play an Armageddon as well. And that's what happened. Magnus faced off with the white pieces. Sorry, I revealed the first few moves earlier on. It again was a Berlin. But as we see, Magnus starts off the game with 10 minutes and Wesley starts off the game with 7 minutes. Now after 40 moves, the players will get a 1 second increment, but black does have draw odds. If the game ends in a draw, black wins and white loses. Alright, so e4, e5, the players played the same opening, knight c6, bishop b5, knight f6, another Berlin, d3, bishop c5, Magnus again took on c6, and castles. And Wesley is the first one to deviate. We saw in the classical that he played the move knight to d7. Didn't seem much wrong with that one, but he played the move bishop to d6, defending the pawn e5 this way. But it's important to point out that white cannot take this pawn because black has to move queen to d4 with a double attack on the pawn, which will be checkmate, and on the knight. Alright, so castles, bishop d6, and now bishop to g5. This spin is always a little bit annoying, because after h6, bishop h4, black can break it with the move g5, but it also weakens the king side a little bit. So Wesley goes queen e7, keeping his options open. And here a slight inaccuracy by Magnus. Perhaps he should have just continued his development with the move knight bd2, maybe knight c4 at some point, but he goes for the very direct d4. And now Wesley just ignores the tension in the center and he plays bishop to g4. And all of a sudden he might be trying to take here and take here. Magnus goes knight bd2 and Wesley goes for queenside castles. Another idea behind the move queen to e7. And generally speaking, the king is sitting pretty safely over here because it has this nice Tetris block, if you will, in front of it. It has 4 pawns. Alright, now Magnus plays the move rook e1, but now Wesley goes g5, bishop g3, and knight to h5, another excellent move. And white has a lot of problems. If you take on e5, black can play something like bishop c5, and they just have a lot of pressure over here. Like, the pins are pretty annoying. So Magnus goes c3, strengthening his center, but now Wesley takes on d4 and plays the move bishop b4, and these pins are starting to become really annoying. So Magnus is like, okay, I don't like how this is going at all, and he decides to go for the move queen to a4. But this does give Wesley the opportunity to take an f3. White has to recapture with the knight, otherwise this one would be hanging, and take on e1. But here Magnus realizes, like, okay, if I recapture on e1, black just plays something like king b8, and it feels like white just doesn't have enough for the exchange. So Magnus, instead of sacrificing an exchange, he takes an a7 and sacrifices a full rook. But the problem for black is this bishop doesn't really have any good squares. For example, if you go bishop to b4, now white goes knight e5, covering the d7 square, and black has nothing better to give up their queen. Alright, so Wesley plays the move queen to b4, an excellent move. He defends this, although white can take anyway, and hits the pawn on b2. Now Magnus takes the bishop. Also, I think most importantly, the queen is defending the b7 pawn. And another important point is that in case of knight e5, now black has to move queen a5 because the bishop covers that square. Alright, so Magnus has to take, but it feels like he's just down in exchange for the not enough compensation. Wesley takes over here. Everything's still looking good, but this is where Wesley made the crucial mistake of the game. It was not easy at all because he's down 2 minutes on the clock. The position is pretty complicated, but had he played the move king to d7, threatening rook to a8, trapping the queen on a7, it's hard to see what Magnus would have done. But he played the move queen b6, which looks completely normal, right? Offering a trade of queens. When you're on material, you want to trade pieces. But now Magnus gave a check, pushed the king forward, and played queen to a4. Perhaps a slight inaccuracy, maybe he should have gone here. But all of a sudden this king is a little bit weak. White wants to open up the position. Knight e5 will always come with a check. Wesley goes f6 to cover it. And Magnus plays d5, trying to break open the center. Wesley drops his king back to c8, but now comes e5, blasting open the center. I mean, Magnus also has these strong passers. Wesley goes king to b8, nicely tucking his king in. But now Magnus takes this pawn on f6. This f-pawn actually is a pretty strong passer. And even though the king, for the moment, is pretty safe, White can always bring in more pieces with something like rook e3 and rook a3. Now Wesley took the pawn, attacking the pawn on f6. But Magnus plays the move f7. And it's really difficult to get rid of this pawn over here. Wesley plays the move queen f6, attacking it. But now Magnus comes in with knight to e5. Not only defending the pawn, but he also wants to go knight d7, forking the queen and the king, and black would be forced to give up the rook. So Wesley plays rook hf8. Now if you give a check, black can take and then take the pawn on f7, and black is pretty much out of the woods because he's threatening a queen trade and this pawn over here. But Magnus played the excellent rook to e3. He's keeping all the tension and he wants to move this rook over here and threaten a checkmate. So Wesley decides to take this pawn on f7, but now Magnus comes up with a great move. He plays the move rook to a3. He's ignoring the threat on f2, because if you take, he just moves his king over here, and if you go c6, now Magnus would sacrifice the knight. Because if you take, he can give a check over here, then give a check over here, and black is busted. There's nothing you can do. If he takes over here, you take and you win the rook. If you go king to d6, white takes here. This rook is probably also going to fall. The king is taken out for a hunt. And if you go king to b6, this will probably lead to some sort of checkmate after rook to a6. So Wesley realized he was in trouble. He played the move pawn to c6, creating an escape route for his king through c7. But here Magnus played queen a7, king c7, and rook to b3. Another great move. Attacking this pawn on b7, he's hanging the knight, but most importantly, he's making sure that this pawn on f2 is protected. Wesley defended the b7 pawn with the move rook to b8, but now came rook to f3. It was important to lure this rook away first, because if you go rook f3, now black can take and they can still block with rook to d7. But after rook b3, rook b8, rook f3, the game is all over. Black took the knight on e5, but now Magnus took over here. The black king is in check. There's no way to block. The king steps forward, you hang the rook. And so Wesley played king d8, but now came rook f8 check. The king is in check. If it moves, you hang this rook on b8. So Magnus Carlsen won the Armageddon game in round number 2. But he did not manage to win the classical game. That being said, he moves up a little bit in the standings. I think right now Fabiano is leading the tournament. He won his first classical game and won the second round in the Armageddon. Anyway, I hope you all enjoyed this recap, and I look forward to seeing you all in the next one.